In a small village, a cat named Whiskers discovered a magic fish in a pond. The fish promised 3 wishes in exchange for its freedom. Whiskers wished for endless fish, a cozy bed, and a bell that rang softly. The fish granted all 3 wishes and swam away, leaving Whiskers content. Marcus Williams adjusted his digital camouflage suit jacket one more time as he stood outside the grand entrance of the Riverside Country Club. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, and he could hear the gentle murmur of wedding guests gathering inside. His hands trembled slightly, not from nerves about the ceremony, but from the weight of the secret he carried. The choice to wear his military dress uniform to his sister Sarah's wedding hadn't been made lightly. Most people would expect him to wear a traditional tuxedo, but Marcus had his reasons. Deep down, he knew this might be one of the last times he'd wear these colors in a peaceful setting. The deployment orders tucked safely in his jacket pocket told a different story about his immediate future. Sarah had been understanding when he'd called her 3 weeks ago. "Wear whatever makes you feel right, Marcus," she'd said over the phone, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that had gotten him through countless difficult moments growing up. "It's just important that you're there." What she didn't know was that being there had required him to go absent, without leave from his base for exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes. As wedding guests filtered past him, Marcus caught glimpses of recognition in their eyes. Some nodded respectfully, others whispered to their companions, and a few older veterans approached to shake his hand. Mr. Henderson from down the street, who'd served in Vietnam, gripped Marcus's shoulder firmly. "Proud of you, son," he said simply before disappearing into the crowd. The country club buzzed with pre-ceremony energy. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced an altar decorated with Sarah's favorite flowers, white roses and baby's breath. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music drifting across the outdoor venue. Marcus found his assigned seat in the front row, reserved for immediate family, and settled in to wait. His phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. The text message was brief but urgent. "Package confirmed." Timeline moved up. "Stand by for further instructions." Marcus's jaw tightened as he read the coded message from his commanding officer. The mission he'd been training for over the past 6 months was accelerating faster than anyone had anticipated. Sarah appeared at the back of the venue, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. She looked radiant in their grandmother's vintage lace dress, which had been carefully altered to fit her perfectly. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant style, and she carried a bouquet of the same white roses that decorated the altar. For a moment, Marcus forgot about everything else: the orders, the deployment, the dangerous assignment waiting for him back at base. The ceremony began with the traditional processional. Sarah's bridesmaids, dressed in soft lavender, walked down the aisle one by one. Then came Sarah herself, escorted by their father, Colonel James Williams, who also wore his dress uniform. The sight of father and daughter, both representing different generations of military service, brought tears to many eyes in the audience. As Sarah reached the altar, she caught Marcus's eye and smiled. It was the same smile she'd given him when he'd left for basic training 4 years ago, full of pride and barely contained worry. Marcus straightened in his chair, feeling the weight of his family's military legacy pressing down on his shoulders. The minister began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the bonds that hold families together through all of life's challenges. Marcus found himself thinking about bonds of a different sort: the brotherhood he shared with his fellow soldiers, the oath he'd taken to protect and serve, and the promise he'd made to himself to always put duty first. During the exchange of vows, Marcus's phone vibrated again. This time he ignored it, focusing instead on Sarah's radiant face as she promised to love and cherish her new husband through whatever challenges life might bring. The irony wasn't lost on him that while she was promising to build a life with someone, he was preparing to risk his own life for people he'd never meet. The rings were exchanged with trembling hands, not from nervousness but from pure emotion. Sarah's new husband, David, was a good man, a teacher at the local elementary school who treated Sarah like she was made of precious metal. Marcus approved of the match, though he'd given David a stern talking to about taking care of his sister during their bachelor party the previous weekend. As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Sarah and David kissed for the first time as a married couple, and Marcus felt a complex mixture of joy and sadness wash over him. Joy for his sister's happiness and sadness because he knew this perfect moment was about to be interrupted by the harsh realities of his military life. The recessional began, and as the wedding party made their way back down the aisle, Marcus's phone rang. Not a text this time, but an actual call from a number he recognized immediately. He glanced around at the celebrating guests and made a quick decision. Slipping away from the crowd, he answered the call in a quiet corner of the country club's garden. "Williams here," he said quietly, keeping his voice low. "Son, we need you back here immediately," came the voice of his commanding officer. "The situation has escalated and your team deploys in 6 hours instead of 6 days." Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Through the garden's entrance, he could see Sarah and David posing for photos, their faces glowing with happiness. The photographer was arranging family members for group shots, and Marcus knew he'd be called over any minute. "Sir, I understand the urgency, but I need 20 more minutes. Family obligation." There was a pause on the other end of the line. 20 minutes, Williams. Not a second more. Lives are depending on your team being ready." As Marcus hung up the phone, he heard the distinctive sound that would change everything. The distant rumble of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. At first it was barely audible over the celebration noise, but it was growing louder by the second. Marcus knew that sound better than his own heartbeat, and his stomach dropped as he realized what was about to happen. The wedding celebration was about to become something entirely different, and Marcus's two worlds, family and duty, were about to collide in a way that would change everything for everyone present, and purring in the sun. The helicopter sound grew from a distant hum to a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath the wedding guests' feet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as 200 people simultaneously looked up at the sky, shading their eyes against the afternoon sun. The string quartet's music faltered and died as even the musicians craned their necks upward. Marcus stepped out from the garden corner, his heart pounding as he watched a black UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter circle the country club, once before beginning its descent toward the golf course adjacent to the wedding venue. The distinctive military aircraft was impossible to mistake, its olive-drab paint job and military markings clearly visible even from a distance. Sarah stood frozen in the middle of a family photo, her wedding dress billowing slightly in the wind created by the approaching helicopter. Her bouquet trembled in her hands as she looked from the aircraft to her brother, a growing understanding dawning in her eyes. David wrapped a protective arm around his new wife, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. "What the hell is that?" shouted Uncle Robert over the noise, his voice barely audible above the rotor wash. Several elderly guests were covering their ears, and small children clung to their parents' legs. Frightened by the overwhelming sound, Marcus's father, Colonel Williams, immediately understood what was happening. His military training kicked in as he scanned the horizon for additional aircraft and assessed potential threats. His eyes found Marcus across the crowd, and the two men shared a look that communicated volumes without a single word being spoken. The helicopter touched down on the 18th green of the golf course, its rotor still spinning but at a slower speed. Through the aircraft's open door, Marcus could see the silhouette of his team leader, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, gesturing urgently for him to approach. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as reality began to sink in. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus called out, his voice carrying the authority of his military training as he stepped forward. The crowd turned toward him, their faces a mixture of curiosity, concern, and growing realization. "I apologize for this interruption to what should be the most perfect day in my sister's life." Sarah broke away from the photographer and walked toward her brother, her heels clicking against the stone pathway. "Marcus, what's happening? Why are they here?" Her voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the underlying tension that only a sister would recognize. "I have to go, Sarah," Marcus said simply, reaching out to take her hands. "There's a situation that requires my immediate attention. I'm sorry it has to be today, but some things can't wait." The wedding guests began to murmur among themselves as the implications became clear. This wasn't a surprise visit or a military honor guard. This was an emergency extraction. Marcus was being pulled away from his sister's wedding for active duty. David stepped forward, still trying to process what was happening. "Can't they wait a few more hours?" "It's our wedding day. For God's sake." His voice carried the frustration of a civilian who couldn't understand why the military would intrude on such a personal moment. "I'm afraid not," Marcus replied, his voice gentle but firm. "When that helicopter shows up, it means people's lives are in danger somewhere in the world, and my team is needed immediately." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she straightened her shoulders in a gesture Marcus recognized from their childhood. It was the same expression she'd worn when he told her he was enlisting, a mixture of pride and heartbreak that she wore like armor. "How long will you be gone this time?" Marcus hesitated, glancing toward the helicopter where Rodriguez was now standing outside the aircraft, clearly impatient but respectful of the situation. "I don't know, sis. Could be days, could be months. But I promise you I'll come back." The photographer, sensing a moment of historical significance, quietly began taking pictures of the scene. The contrast was striking, a bride in white lace standing next to a soldier in camouflage with a military helicopter in the background. It was an image that would later appear in newspapers across the country as a symbol of duty versus family. Colonel Williams approached his children, his own military bearing evident in every step. "Son, how much time do you have?" he asked, understanding the situation better than anyone else present. 5 minutes, maybe less," Marcus replied, watching Rodriguez tap his watch urgently. "They moved up our deployment timeline. Something big is happening overseas." Sarah wiped her eyes carefully, trying not to smudge her makeup. "Then we need to make these 5 minutes count," she said with determination. "Everyone gather around for one last family photo." The wedding guests, understanding the gravity of the moment, quickly arranged themselves around the bride and groom. Marcus stood beside his sister, his arm around her shoulders while their parents flanked them on the other side. The photographer worked quickly, capturing not just a family portrait but a moment in time when love, duty, and sacrifice intersected. As the shutter clicked, Marcus felt his phone vibrate with an urgent message. Rodriguez was now walking quickly toward the wedding party, his expression apologetic but urgent. The helicopter's engines began to rev higher, preparing for immediate takeoff. "Marcus," Rodriguez called out as he approached. "We need to move now. The situation has deteriorated and we're wheels up in 2 minutes." Sarah turned to face her brother fully, taking both of his hands in hers. "I need you to promise me something," she said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll remember that you have people here who love you and need you to come home." "I promise," Marcus replied, pulling his sister into a tight embrace. "And I need you to promise me that you'll be happy, that you'll build the life you've always dreamed of with David, and that you won't worry about me every single day." "I can't promise not to worry." Sarah laughed through her tears. "But I promise to be happy." Marcus turned to shake hands with David, but his new brother-in-law pulled him into an unexpected hug instead. "Take care of yourself out there," David said quietly. "Sarah needs her big brother to come home in one piece." The moment was interrupted by the increasing urgency of the helicopter's engines. Rodriguez was now beside them, speaking directly to Marcus while trying to be respectful of the family moment. "Sir, we really need to go. The briefing starts in 40 minutes and we have a 3-hour flight ahead of us." Marcus kissed his sister's forehead one last time, then turned and walked quickly toward the waiting aircraft. The wedding guests watched in silence as the soldier strode across the golf course, his camouflage uniform a stark contrast to the manicured green grass. As he reached the helicopter, Marcus turned back one final time to wave at the crowd. Sarah stood at the center of the group, her white dress brilliant in the afternoon sun, surrounded by family and friends who understood they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The helicopter lifted off with Marcus aboard, leaving behind a wedding party that would never forget the day duty, called a soldier away from his sister's wedding. As the aircraft disappeared into the distance, the sound of its rotors gradually faded, replaced by the stunned silence of 200 people who had just witnessed the true cost of military service. Wake up to barista-quality coffee with the Brewmaster coffee maker. With a single touch, brew the perfect cup every morning, customized to your taste. Sleek, easy to use, and designed to make every day a little better. Order now to transform your mindside the Black Hawk helicopter. Marcus strapped himself into the jump seat as the aircraft banked sharply toward the military base. The familiar vibration of the aircraft and the rhythmic thump of the rotors provided a strange comfort after the emotional intensity of leaving his sister's wedding. Rodriguez handed him a headset and a classified briefing folder marked with red tape. "Sorry about pulling you away from the family celebration." "Williams!" Rodriguez shouted over the engine noise before they both put on their headsets. But this situation escalated faster than anyone anticipated. Marcus opened the briefing folder and began reading the mission parameters. His expression grew more serious with each page. A humanitarian crisis had developed in a remote region of Eastern Europe, where a natural disaster had trapped dozens of civilians in an area that had become politically unstable overnight. The local government had specifically requested American Special Operations assistance due to the technical nature of the rescue operation. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked through the headset intercom, his voice now carrying the professional tone he used during military operations. "Bad enough that they activated our team 6 days early," Rodriguez replied. "We're talking about a collapsed mountain tunnel with civilians trapped inside. And the political situation in the region has deteriorated to the point where local rescue teams can't operate safely." As the helicopter flew toward the base, Marcus found himself thinking about the contrast between the celebration he'd just left and the crisis he was flying toward. An hour ago, he'd been watching his sister promise to love and cherish someone for the rest of her life. Now he was preparing to risk his own life to save people he'd never met in a country he'd never visited. The base came into view, and Marcus could see unusual activity on the tarmac. Transport aircraft were being loaded with equipment, and personnel were moving with the urgent efficiency that indicated a high-priority deployment. The Black Hawk touched down near the Special Operations compound, and Marcus jogged toward the briefing room while still carrying his sister's wedding favor in his pocket. Inside the compound, the rest of his 6-man team was already assembled around a large table covered with maps, satellite photographs, and technical diagrams. Staff Sergeant Thompson looked up as Marcus entered, still wearing his dress uniform. "How was the wedding, Williams?" "Sorry we had to cut it short." "My sister understood," Marcus replied simply, though the tightness in his voice suggested the emotional cost of leaving. "What's our timeline?" Captain Morrison, their team leader, gestured toward the wall display where satellite images showed the disaster zone. "We wheels up in 3 hours. The tunnel collapse happened 18 hours ago, and we have a narrow window before weather conditions make the rescue impossible." Marcus studied the photographs while stripping off his dress uniform and pulling on his tactical gear. The images showed a mountainous region where a major highway tunnel had partially collapsed during a minor earthquake. The geological instability had created a situation where traditional heavy rescue equipment couldn't be used without risking a complete collapse that would kill everyone trapped. Inside, local authorities estimate between 30 and 40 civilians trapped in air pockets throughout the tunnel, Morrison continued. But here's the complication. The region has become a contested area between government forces and rebel groups. Neither side wants to risk their people on a rescue operation, but they've agreed to allow us a 12-hour window to attempt the rescue. Thompson pointed to specific locations on the map. "We'll be using microcharges to create new access points without destabilizing the remaining structure. Williams, your expertise in controlled demolitions makes you essential for this operation." Marcus nodded, understanding why his presence was critical enough to justify pulling him away from his sister's wedding. His specialized training in precision explosives made him one of only a handful of soldiers capable of the delicate work required for this type of rescue operation. "What about extraction?" asked Specialist Davis, the team's communications expert. "How do we get out once we've completed the rescue?" "That's where it gets interesting," Morrison replied with a grim smile. "We have a narrow window of political cooperation, but if shooting starts between the government forces and rebels while we're in there, we're on our own until things calm down." The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering every aspect of the mission from insertion methods to medical protocols for treating trapped civilians. Marcus found himself compartmentalizing his emotions, pushing thoughts of Sarah's wedding into a mental box that he would deal with later. Right now, people's lives depended on his ability to focus completely on the mission. As the team prepared their equipment, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Saw the news about the earthquake. I understand why you had to go. Be safe and come home to us." The message was accompanied by a photo of her and David cutting their wedding cake, both of them smiling despite the circumstances. Marcus showed the photo to Rodriguez, who whistled softly. Your sister's got class, Williams. Not many people would be that understanding about having their wedding interrupted by military operations. She grew up in a military family, Marcus replied, carefully packing his demolitions equipment. She understands that sometimes duty has to come first, even when it hurts. The team's gear was loaded onto a waiting C-130 transport aircraft as the sun began to set. Marcus took one last look at his phone, seeing additional messages from family members who had heard about the emergency deployment through military channels. His father had sent a simple message: "Proud of you, son. Complete the mission and come home safe." As they boarded the aircraft for the long flight overseas, Marcus reflected on the day's events. 12 hours ago, he'd been adjusting his dress uniform for his sister's wedding, worried about whether he looked appropriate for the celebration. Now he was wearing full combat gear and preparing for one of the most challenging missions of his military career. The C-130's engines roared to life, and the aircraft began taxiing toward the runway. Through the small window, Marcus could see the lights of the city where his sister was probably finishing her wedding reception, dancing with her new husband and celebrating the beginning of their life together. Rodriguez sat beside him, also looking out the window. "You know, Williams, this is what we signed up for when we took the oath. Protecting people, even when it means missing the most important moments in our own lives." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of his choices. "I just hope the people we're going to save understand the cost of their rescue. Not just what we're risking, but what we're giving up to be there for them." As the aircraft lifted off into the night sky, Marcus closed his eyes and began mentally preparing for the mission ahead. Somewhere in a collapsed tunnel thousands of miles away, dozens of people were waiting for rescue, not knowing that their salvation would come at the cost of a soldier missing his sister's wedding. The flight would take 14 hours, giving the team time to rest and mentally prepare for what promised to be one of the most technically challenging and emotionally demanding missions of their careers. But as Marcus settled in for the long flight, he carried with him the image of Sarah's smile and the knowledge that some duties transcend personal sacrifice. Warnings. 14 hours later, the C-130 transport aircraft descended through thick clouds toward a military airfield in Eastern Europe. Marcus and his team had spent the flight reviewing mission protocols, checking equipment and trying to grab whatever rest they could manage in the cramped aircraft. As they approached the landing zone, the reality of their situation became clear through the aircraft's windows. The countryside below showed the aftermath of both natural disaster and human conflict. Smoke plumes rose from several locations, and Marcus could see military vehicles positioned along roads leading to the disaster zone. The earthquake that had caused the tunnel collapse had also disrupted the fragile peace in the region, with both government forces and rebel groups now eyeing each other suspiciously across hastily established checkpoints. Upon landing, the team was met by Colonel Petrov, a weathered local military officer who would serve as their liaison with both competing factions. His English was heavily accented but clear as he briefed them on the deteriorating situation. "Gentlemen, you have perhaps 10 hours before this ceasefire falls apart," Petrov said grimly as they stood beside their equipment on the tarmac. "Both sides are using this rescue operation as propaganda, but neither wants to be blamed if civilians die because they interfered with your work." Marcus studied the latest geological surveys as they traveled by convoy toward the disaster site. The tunnel had been a vital transportation link through the mountains, connecting isolated communities to the outside world. When the earthquake struck, the tunnel had partially collapsed at 3 different points, creating isolated air pockets where survivors were trapped. "The good news," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, a structural engineer who had flown in from the United Nations Disaster Response Team, "is that we've detected signs of life in at least 2 of the trapped sections. The bad news is that the entire structure is so unstable that one wrong move could bring down the whole mountain." As their convoy approached the disaster zone, Marcus could see the scope of the challenge ahead. The tunnel entrance was partially blocked by massive concrete slabs and twisted metal, while rescue equipment from 3 different countries sat idle because engineers were afraid to use heavy machinery near the unstable structure. Local families had gathered at the tunnel entrance, many holding photographs of missing relatives. An elderly woman approached Marcus as he stepped out of the vehicle, speaking rapidly in her native language while pointing toward the blocked tunnel. Though he couldn't understand her words, the desperation in her voice was universal. She says her grandson was driving through the tunnel when it collapsed, translated a local Red Cross volunteer. He was supposed to pick up his daughter from school. She's been waiting here for 18 hours. Marcus nodded respectfully to the woman, understanding that each trapped person represented a family in anguish. This knowledge would drive him and his team to take calculated risks that they might otherwise avoid. These weren't just statistics in a mission report. They were real people with families who loved them. Rodriguez set up the command post while Marcus began his initial assessment of the tunnel structure. Using specialized equipment, he started mapping the safest locations for precision charges that could create new access points without triggering a complete collapse. The work required intense concentration, as a miscalculation could kill both the trapped civilians and the rescue team. "I can create 3 access points," Marcus reported to Captain Morrison after completing his initial survey. "But I need absolute silence during the placement phase. Any vibration from vehicles or equipment could trigger another collapse." The complexity of the situation became clear as Marcus began his work. While he focused on the technical aspects of the rescue, Thompson and Davis established communication with the trapped survivors using sensitive listening equipment. Their voices, weak but audible through the rubble, provided crucial information about the conditions inside the collapsed sections. "We have confirmed survivors in sections A and C," Davis reported through his headset. "Section B is unclear. We're getting tapping sounds but no voices." Marcus worked methodically, placing small charges with the precision of a surgeon. Each explosive device had to be positioned exactly right to create an opening, without destabilizing the surrounding structure. The work was made more difficult by the presence of armed soldiers from both factions, who watched nervously from a distance while occasionally arguing with each other about territorial boundaries. As Marcus prepared to detonate the first charge, his phone buzzed with a message from home. Sarah had sent a photo of her and David at the airport, departing for their honeymoon in Italy. The message read, "Thinking of you and praying for your mission. The whole family is watching the news. Come home safe." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that while his sister was beginning the happiest time of her life, he was working in one of the most dangerous situations of his career. But the photo actually strengthened his resolve. Sarah's happiness reminded him why his work mattered. Protecting innocent people was worth the personal sacrifices it required. "Fire in the hole," Marcus called out, and the first precision charge detonated with a controlled explosion that sent dust and small debris flying, but left the main structure intact. Through the newly created opening, they could hear voices calling for help. The first group of survivors emerged after 20 minutes of careful extraction work. A family of 4 had been trapped in their car when the tunnel collapsed around them. The children, terrified but uninjured, clung to their parents as medical personnel checked them over. The emotional reunion with their extended family members waiting outside brought tears to the eyes of even the hardened soldiers. Marcus moved immediately to the second location, knowing that time was running out. Reports from the perimeter indicated that the ceasefire between government and rebel forces was becoming increasingly fragile. Gunfire had been heard in the distance, and both military commanders were pressuring the rescue team to work faster. The second charge proved more challenging. The geological instability in this section required Marcus to use multiple smaller explosions, rather than one larger blast. Each detonation had to be precisely timed to avoid creating a chain reaction that could bring down the entire tunnel system. "Williams, we're getting radio chatter that suggests shooting may start within the hour," Morrison warned through the headset. "How much more time do you need?" Marcus assessed the remaining work while placing charges for the third and most difficult section. "Give me 40 minutes and I can get everyone out. But if shooting starts before then, we'll have to make some hard choices about who to save first." The pressure was immense, but Marcus drew on his training and experience to maintain focus. Each decision had to be perfect, each calculation exact. The lives of the trapped civilians, and potentially his own team, depended on his ability to work flawlessly under extreme pressure. As he prepared the final series of charges, Marcus thought about the wedding he'd left behind and the mission that had brought him here. In a few hours, he would either be celebrating a successful rescue or dealing with a tragedy that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But regardless of the outcome, he knew he had made the right choice in answering the call to duty. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the mountains as Marcus made final adjustments to the explosive charges. Time was running out and the most dangerous part of the mission was still ahead. The distant gunfire grew closer as Marcus made final preparations for the most critical phase of the rescue operation. The third section of the collapsed tunnel contained the largest group of trapped survivors, but it was also the most structurally compromised. One miscalculation here could trigger a catastrophic collapse that would kill everyone still trapped inside. "Williams, we've got movement on both flanks," Rodriguez reported through the radio. "Government forces are advancing from the east and rebel units are repositioning to the west. Our window is closing fast." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he studied the complex pattern of cracks in the concrete overhead. The geological stress patterns told a story of imminent structural failure, but the voices calling for help from behind the debris told an equally compelling story of human desperation. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the rubble, people were counting on him to save their lives. Dr. Chen crouched beside him, her tablet showing real-time stress analysis of the tunnel structure. "The vibrations from the gunfire are actually making things worse," she said quietly. "Each explosion is sending shockwaves through the rock that are further destabilizing the remaining supports." Marcus nodded grimly as he placed the final charges. This operation would require a sequence of 4 precisely timed explosions, each one designed to relieve pressure on the structure, while creating an escape route for the trapped civilians. The margin for error was essentially 0. Too much explosive force would bring down the mountain. Too little would leave people trapped to die slowly in the darkness. Through his headset, Marcus could hear Davis communicating with the survivors in the final section. A group of construction workers had been performing maintenance in the tunnel when the earthquake struck. Their knowledge of the tunnel's layout was proving invaluable, but their increasingly weak voices indicated that time was running out for other reasons as well. "We count 12 people back here," came the faint voice through Davis's equipment, "but the air is getting thin, and we have 2 people with serious injuries who need immediate medical attention." Captain Morrison made the difficult decision that military leaders sometimes face in crisis situations. "Williams, you have 15 minutes to complete this phase. After that, we extract with whoever we've rescued so far. The shooting is getting too close to risk the entire team." Marcus understood the logic of the decision, but emotionally he struggled with the idea of leaving people behind. The wedding photo of Sarah and David was still in his pocket, a reminder of life's precious moments and the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. These trapped workers had families too, people who were waiting desperately for news of their loved ones. "I need 20 minutes, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the pressure. "I can get them all out, but not if we rush this." The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the valley, much closer now. Through gaps in the tunnel debris, Marcus could see muzzle flashes in the distance as the 2 opposing forces began engaging each other. The civilians waiting outside the tunnel entrance were being evacuated to safer positions by Red Cross personnel. Marcus began the sequence of controlled explosions, each one carefully timed to the second. The first charge created a small opening that immediately vented stale air and toxic fumes from the trapped section. The second explosion, 5 seconds later, widened the opening enough for rescue personnel to begin entering the space. As Thompson and Rodriguez prepared to enter the newly created opening, Marcus's phone buzzed with an urgent message. It was from his father. "Watching news coverage of your mission. Proud of what you're doing. Sarah says to tell you she loves you and that your wedding gift better be worth missing the reception." Despite the intensity of the situation, Marcus smiled briefly at his sister's message. Even in the middle of a crisis, Sarah was trying to keep his spirits up with humor. That was exactly the kind of strength that made military families special, the ability to find light in the darkest moments. The third explosion had to be delayed when Rodriguez reported unstable conditions inside the tunnel section. "We've got people trapped under heavy debris in here," he called through the radio. "I need cutting equipment before we can move them safely." Marcus made rapid calculations while Thompson organized the cutting equipment. Each minute of delay increased the risk that the fighting outside would reach their position, but rushing the extraction could kill the very people they were trying to save. The weight of command decisions pressed down on him as he realized that people's lives hung in the balance of his technical expertise. Dr. Chen monitored the structural readings on her tablet, calling out warnings when stress levels approached critical thresholds. The gunfire vibrations are creating microfractures in the support columns, she reported. We're approaching the point where the entire section could collapse without any additional explosive charges. The rescue work inside the tunnel became a race against time and physics. Thompson and Rodriguez worked with mechanical cutting tools to free trapped workers, while Marcus prepared the final explosive charge that would create a large enough opening for rapid evacuation. The injured workers would need to be carried out on stretchers, requiring a bigger exit than the small holes that had been sufficient for mobile survivors. We're bringing out the first injured worker now, Rodriguez reported, but the second one is pinned under a concrete beam that we can't move without heavy equipment. Marcus faced a crucial decision. The final explosion would create the large opening needed for stretcher evacuation, but the structural analysis showed that it might also trigger the complete collapse of this tunnel section. He could save the injured worker who was already freed, but the one trapped under concrete might die in the collapse. As he wrestled with this impossible choice, Marcus heard a new voice through the communications equipment. One of the trapped workers was volunteering to stay behind with the pinned man, to keep working on freeing him even if it meant both of them might not make it out alive. Nobody gets left behind, Marcus said firmly into his radio. Thompson, Rodriguez, get everyone you can move to the exit point. I'm going to use a shaped charge to lift that concrete beam just enough to pull our guy free. The shaped charge was an extremely risky option. It would require Marcus to enter the unstable tunnel section himself, place the explosive device with millimeter precision, and detonate it from close range. If his calculations were wrong, the explosion could kill everyone in the section, including himself. Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the radio with undisguised concern. Williams, that's not a risk we can authorize. The structural engineer says there's a 60% chance of total collapse. Marcus checked his equipment one final time, thinking about duty, sacrifice, and the promises that soldiers make to each other and to the people they protect. Sometimes 60% odds are the best you're going to get, sir. I'm going in. As gunfire erupted much closer to their position, Marcus crawled into the unstable tunnel section carrying his final explosive charge and the hope that his sister's faith in him was justified. Inside the unstable tunnel section, Marcus crawled through a nightmare landscape of twisted metal and broken concrete. His headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing the precarious nature of his situation. Overhead, massive concrete slabs hung at impossible angles, held in place only by the random geometry of destruction and the hope that physics would cooperate for a few more minutes. The trapped worker, a man named Victor, according to the information Davis had gathered, was conscious but clearly in severe pain. The concrete beam across his legs appeared to have caused multiple fractures, and his pale complexion suggested he was going into shock. Beside him, another worker named Pavel had refused evacuation, staying behind to keep Victor conscious and alert. American soldier, Victor said weakly in broken English as Marcus approached. You should not risk your life for old construction worker like me. Marcus knelt beside the trapped man, carefully examining the concrete beam and the supporting structure around it. Victor, I didn't leave my sister's wedding to let you die in this tunnel. We're all getting out of here together. The shaped charge Marcus carried was designed for precision work. It could direct explosive force in a specific direction to lift the concrete beam without sending debris flying in all directions. But placing it correctly in this unstable environment required him to work in a space barely larger than his own body, with tons of unstable debris hanging overhead. Through his earpiece, Marcus could hear the sounds of battle getting closer. Thompson was coordinating the evacuation of the rescued survivors while Rodriguez provided security at the tunnel entrance. Dr. Chen's voice provided a constant stream of structural updates, none of them encouraging. Williams, seismic sensors are showing increased instability with each gunshot, she reported. You have maybe 5 minutes before the whole section becomes completely unpredictable. Marcus worked with surgical precision, placing the shaped charge at the exact point where it would provide maximum lifting force with minimum structural disruption. Pavel held a flashlight steady while Marcus made the final connections, both men understanding that their lives depended on calculations performed under the worst possible conditions. As Marcus prepared to retreat to a safe distance for detonation, Victor grabbed his arm with surprising strength. If this does not work, he said quietly, please tell my wife Anna that I was thinking of her. She works at the school in the village. Tell her I kept the promise I made on our wedding day. The mention of wedding promises hit Marcus with unexpected emotional force. Less than 24 hours ago, he had watched his sister make similar promises to her new husband. Now he was listening to a dying man talk about promises he might never get to keep. The parallel between Victor's wedding memories and Sarah's wedding day created a connection that transcended language and nationality. "You can tell her yourself when we get you out of here," Marcus replied firmly, though privately he knew the odds of success were getting worse by the minute. The gunfire outside reached a crescendo as Marcus activated the timer on the shaped charge. He had 90 seconds to reach minimum safe distance, not much time when crawling through unstable debris in the dark. Pavel helped as much as he could, but Marcus was essentially racing against physics and time while carrying the weight of other people's hopes. With 30 seconds left on the timer, Marcus reached what he calculated to be minimum safe distance and pressed himself against the tunnel wall. Pavel had positioned himself to shield Victor from any flying debris, showing the kind of courage that Marcus had seen throughout his military career, ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demanded it. The shaped charge detonated with a sharp crack, then a thunderous explosion. Marcus felt the shock wave through the ground and heard the grinding sound of concrete moving against concrete. For a terrifying moment, the entire tunnel section shook as if the mountain itself was deciding whether to collapse completely. Then, incredibly, the concrete beam lifted just enough to free Victor's legs. Pavel immediately began pulling his friend clear, while Marcus crawled back to help with the extraction. Victor screamed in pain as his broken legs were moved, but he was alive and free from the crushing weight that had trapped him. "Can you carry him?" Marcus asked Pavel, knowing that he needed to focus on getting them all out safely rather than providing medical care inside the unstable tunnel. "I carry him," Pavel replied with determination that reminded Marcus of his own military brothers. "We go now, yes?" The extraction through the narrow opening Marcus had created earlier became an exercise in controlled desperation. Pavel went first, then helped pull Victor through while Marcus pushed from behind. Every movement sent vibrations through the structure, and Dr. Chen's increasingly urgent warnings indicated that they were operating on borrowed time. As they emerged from the tunnel into daylight, Marcus was amazed to see that the battle outside had somehow paused. Both government forces and rebel units had pulled back to defensive positions, apparently unwilling to risk hitting the international rescue team with stray fire. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that some things transcended political conflicts. Medical personnel immediately took charge of Victor, loading him onto a stretcher and beginning emergency treatment for his injuries. Pavel refused medical attention for himself, instead staying beside his friend and translating for the medical team. The bond between the two construction workers reminded Marcus of the relationships he had with his own team members. Captain Morrison appeared at Marcus's side as they watched the medical evacuation. All survivors accounted for, Williams. 37 people extracted alive, including the 2 from this section. Outstanding work under impossible conditions. As the rescue helicopters prepared to evacuate the most seriously injured survivors, Marcus finally allowed himself to feel the emotional weight of what had just happened. The mission had been successful, but the personal cost was becoming clear. He had missed his sister's wedding, risked his life and the lives of his team, and experienced levels of stress that would require weeks to process fully. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Saw the news coverage of the rescue. David and I are watching from our hotel in Rome. You saved all those people, Marcus. I'm so proud to be your sister." Rodriguez approached with a satellite phone, grinning despite his exhaustion. "Williams, you need to take this call. It's someone who wants to talk to the hero of the day." Marcus took the phone hesitantly, unsure who would be calling him on a military satellite line. The voice that came through was weak but unmistakably grateful. "Is this the American soldier who saved my husband Victor?" asked a woman with heavily accented English. "Yes, ma'am. This is Sergeant Marcus Williams," he replied, suddenly understanding who was calling. "This is Anna, Victor's wife. He told me to call and thank the soldier who risked his life for an old construction worker. But I want you to know you didn't just save my husband. You saved the father of our 3 children and the grandfather of our 2 little ones. You saved our whole family." As Marcus listened to Anna's emotional thanks, he realized that the true measure of his sacrifice wasn't the wedding he had missed, but the lives he had helped preserve. Victor would keep his wedding, Promises to Anna because Marcus had chosen duty over personal. Celebration. The parallel between Victor's marriage and Sarah's wedding created a symmetry that Marcus found both beautiful and bittersweet. Love and duty didn't have to be opposing forces. Sometimes they reinforced each other in unexpected ways. 6 weeks later, Marcus stood in the arrivals terminal of the international airport, still wearing his travel-worn military fatigues after the long flight home. His deployment had extended beyond the rescue mission, as his team had been reassigned to assist with humanitarian operations in the earthquake-affected region. The extra time overseas had given him perspective on what had happened, but nothing had prepared him for the welcome he was about to receive. Sarah spotted him first, even though she was supposed to be on her honeymoon in Italy for another week. She ran toward him through the crowded terminal, her sundress and sandals a stark contrast to his military uniform. Behind her, David followed with a smile that suggested he had been completely supportive of cutting their honeymoon short to welcome Marcus home. "You beautiful idiot," Sarah said as she hugged her brother tightly. "You made international news and didn't even bother to call us for 3 days afterward." Marcus held his sister close, feeling emotions he had kept carefully controlled during the mission finally beginning to surface. "I was a little busy making sure all the paperwork was filed correctly," he said with a laugh that sounded slightly forced. "Military bureaucracy doesn't stop for heroic rescues." David shook Marcus's hand warmly, then surprised him with a brief hug. "Sarah insisted we come back early when we heard you were finally rotating home. She said her honeymoon could wait, but welcoming her brother home from saving 37 lives couldn't." As they walked through the terminal, Marcus noticed people recognizing him from the news coverage. The story of the soldier who left his sister's wedding to perform an international rescue had captured public imagination in a way that made Marcus slightly uncomfortable. He preferred the anonymity that usually came with military service. "There's something we need to show you," Sarah said as they reached the parking garage. "The media attention from your mission has had some unexpected consequences." In the car, Sarah handed Marcus a tablet loaded with news articles, social media posts, and videos from around the world. The story of his helicopter extraction from the wedding had been picked up by international media, and the subsequent successful rescue operation had made him an unlikely symbol of military dedication and sacrifice. "Look at this one," David said, pointing to a video with millions of views. "It's security camera footage of you walking toward the helicopter at the wedding. Someone set it to music and it's become this whole thing about duty versus family." Marcus watched the video with a mixture of pride and discomfort. The footage showed him in his dress uniform, walking away from the wedding celebration toward the waiting Black Hawk. The music was stirring, and the comments were overwhelmingly positive, but Marcus felt strange seeing such a personal moment turned into public inspiration. "And this," Sarah added, showing him another article, "is a piece about Victor and his family. Apparently he's been telling everyone in his village about the American soldier who risked his life for a stranger. There's a movement in his country to name a school after you." The tablet showed photos of Victor with his family, his legs in casts, but his smile broad and genuine. Anna, his wife, was quoted extensively about the phone call she had made to thank Marcus. Their children and grandchildren surrounded Victor in the photos, a visual reminder of the lives that had been preserved by the rescue operation. As they drove toward the family home, Marcus began to understand the broader impact of his choices. The wedding he had left behind had become a symbol of military sacrifice, while the rescue he had participated in had demonstrated the positive impact of that sacrifice. The two events were now permanently linked in a way that gave meaning to both. "There's something else," Sarah said as they pulled into the driveway of their childhood home. "Mom and Dad have been planning something special for your homecoming. They wanted to surprise you, but I thought you should have some warning." The surprise became apparent as soon as Marcus stepped out of the car. The front yard was decorated with yellow ribbons and welcome home signs, but more significantly, there were people gathered whom Marcus hadn't expected to see. Pavel, Victor's friend from the tunnel, was standing on the front porch next to Colonel Williams. "Pavel?" Marcus said in amazement as he approached the house. "What are you doing here?" Pavel smiled broadly and embraced Marcus like a long-lost brother. "Victor, he wanted to come himself, but doctors say no flying with broken legs. So he sends me to thank the American soldier who saved his life. He gives me this for you." Pavel handed Marcus a small wooden box containing a wedding ring. Not Victor's own ring, but one that had been crafted specifically for this moment. Victor, he says you understand about wedding promises because you left your sister's wedding to save his life. This ring, it represents the promise that soldier makes to protect people who cannot protect themselves. Marcus examined the ring, which was carved with symbols representing both American and Eastern European military traditions. It was clearly handmade, probably by Victor himself during his recovery, and represented hours of careful work by a man who wanted to express gratitude in a tangible way. Inside the house, Marcus discovered that his parents had invited several of the wedding guests to a welcome home gathering. The photographer who had captured the helicopter extraction was there, along with several family friends who had witnessed the dramatic interruption of Sarah's wedding. We wanted to create some better memories to go with that day, his mother explained as she hugged him. Sarah's wedding will always be remembered for the dramatic moment when duty called. But we wanted you to know that everyone understood why you had to go. The evening celebration provided Marcus with something he hadn't realized he needed: the opportunity to process the events of the past 6 weeks with people who cared about him personally, rather than viewing him as a news story or military hero. The conversation moved naturally between wedding memories and rescue mission details, creating a narrative that honored both events. Sarah presented Marcus with a special wedding album that included photos from both her celebration and news coverage of his rescue mission. "I wanted you to see that your sacrifice didn't diminish our wedding day," she explained. "It made it more meaningful, because it showed everyone present what kind of man my brother really is." The album's final page contained a letter from Victor, translated into English, expressing his gratitude and explaining how the rescue had affected his family. He wrote about returning to work at the tunnel reconstruction project, determined to build something better and safer for the next generation. He also wrote about his grandchildren, who were too young to understand what had happened, but would grow up hearing the story of the American soldier who saved their grandfather's life. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah on the back porch where they had played as children. The conversation that followed would shape how both of them understood the relationship between personal happiness and duty to others. "Do you regret leaving my wedding?" Sarah asked quietly, looking up at the stars that were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. Marcus considered the question carefully, thinking about everything that had happened since that helicopter had appeared over the country club. "I regret that the timing forced me to choose between two important things," he said finally. "But I don't regret the choice I made. Those 37 people are alive because our team was there when they needed us." Sarah nodded, understanding the distinction. "I'm proud of you, Marcus, not just for the rescue, but for showing me what real commitment looks like. When David and I made our wedding vows, we were promising to put each other first. But watching you leave our wedding to save strangers taught me that sometimes love means putting something bigger than yourself first." The conversation continued late into the night, two siblings processing how a single day had changed their understanding of love, duty, and sacrifice. Marcus's choice to leave the wedding had created a story that would be told in their family for generations. But more importantly, it had reinforced the values that made such choices possible. As Marcus finally went to bed in his childhood bedroom, he thought about Victor and Anna, about wedding promises and military oaths, and about the unexpected ways that doing the right thing can create connections across continents and cultures. The ring Pavel had given him sat on his nightstand, a reminder that sometimes the most important promises are the ones we make to people we've never met.